teams. And we did talk about our team report. So the one thing I sort of take away is we've got all this engager sort of influence here, and we've been watching and listening. You guys are probably ready for some fun conversation. Keith is okay. It's like, I can be reflective here. He was okay. I can be reflective. But, if we were all working together as a team, because we are that engager team, we would probably have more chatter as a team, and we'd be working. We'd see that, the interaction. We've had a lot of that today. And I say that because I really wanted to understand, why teams, when they come together, we talk a lot about this with hiring the right talents, the right team members working together, unlocking blockages. And I think this is a great term, blockages, because sometimes in work, people sort of, maybe they're not working on the right things because they're just not naturally talented to do it, but it can create blockages. And blockages, if you don't know them, can lead to either they don't get done or somebody's really just paralyzed sort of getting through things. And if you have an open and transparent environment where people are helping each other, really reducing those blockages, and that people can actually say, hey, I have a blockage here. Can somebody help? In a productive way, it can really help your team move to that more performance stage. Building that open communication, allowing for creative conflict. We've talked a lot about the trust and the skeptical side. Just because somebody is skeptical, they need to learn by asking questions. That can intimidate some very trusting folks, but that's sometimes creative conflict. You need to have that. Building those higher levels of team engagement. Matching teams to your clients. If you have, no offense, Keith, but if you have strategists that are sort of in customer care roles all the time and they don't get a lot of time to really be more analytical, and their customers are calling in and it's, they never know what's on the other end, that might not be the right person for that role. It can lead to matching the wrong people with the wrong, to your customers. You want probably those community builders that are receiving those calls and talking to them. Matching people to those roles. And this here is probably one of the more, because we do talk about trust. And trust isn't just because we have it on our report, it's great, we can measure that. But truly, trust can be broken in about 2 seconds in any team. And even if they've been working for a while, because it's all about sort of expectations. And sometimes it's because the organization is just fast-paced. They're trying to get through things, trying to get projects done. But it really is showing the talents, understanding, acceptance, respect. Creating these things builds trust along the way. But if you don't have aligned trust, you really can't get to team success. It's really important. The unity, our diversity to unity is really around building that trustful environment, building that cohesive team. That's really what you can do. And when we looked at our report, we had another individual that was going to be here. And I think at one point, this team actually rolled up as an adapter team.
Well, I ran 3 versions of the report. We started as an adapter team. I added you and Hugh.
We moved to
Initiator team, and then we dropped one out and we became an integrator.
Yeah. So that's quite interesting. So that just shows the power of this team report. When you have a new team member come in, it will change the dynamics of not only the team report, but just for the group. So you can see when, if you've ever worked on a team that's been high performing, everything just really works well. It's like, it's really quite amazing to be working in a team like that. One person leaves and it starts back at storming, or it goes back to forming and getting through the storming. May take a minute, may take 6 months, but we all have to understand the behavioral fit of that team. So it's quite interesting to do this, and you can really help when you're working in an engagement as a consultant with the team. It's important that you sort of interview the leader, because you sort of find out what's their goal, what they're trying to get out of this. But when you put everybody through the DNA profile assessment, it's important to acknowledge that people have been through this. And I'm not talking that you have to spend hours with each individual, but you really get the truth when you have access to people and what's really going on. Because the leader may think something's going on, but you really find out through these interviews if there's you're building trust, and it's not used in a punitive way. You're brought in to help really align that team, get better performance. And I'm sure probably if you've done it, run a team event, you can really understand the power of making sure that everybody's sort of heard as part of that. I mentioned, if you're brought into an engagement, the leader review, it's pretty important to understand sort of what their expectations are. Team member review, I think it's important for everybody if they've gone through the process, that they get the report, but that they have some access to the consultant, or if it's an internal leader that's sort of doing the debriefs, that they have some acknowledgement, so there's some interaction. I've gone through this process, what does it mean? And then often there's a team meeting that sort of aligns everybody. You get to learn about something. We call that sort of an awareness session. Everybody sort of gets to see how it fits, how their piece fits into the team. And then obviously building the relationships and sort of flexing that. And then your leader, through a process, probably the 360 is a logical step where everybody that works for the leader gets to rate them. There's a self-assessment, and then everybody completes that leader review. It's quite impactful. It really helps measure the leadership development of that person. And then team monitoring. This is something that's pretty important. As a consultant, you may actually go in and do quarterly check-ins with the team if you're working with the team long term. That's where you actually find out if things are really working the way you thought they were going to. But these are great 6 steps in that team monitoring. I would say that if you're ever brought into an engagement where the leader says, I want you to come in, I've got some broken processes, and I've got people that I probably need to displace, you got to be very sensitive and careful of those, because you may not be successful, especially if they don't let you have access to everybody in that interview. In fact, I would say you probably don't want to take that engagement, because really not going to get what's really going on. And there are some leaders, and sometimes they're not self-aware of their own behavior to the rest of the team. So I have had a personal experience at Coca-Cola with that, where I was brought into the team. It was a fast-track team, and they wouldn't, just because of timing is what I was told, they didn't have access to the people. And I wasn't working here at DNA Behavior at the time, but that was one of the clarity moments for me of never do that again, because I actually went into the team meeting, and one of the employees really didn't like the manager, sort of had an outburst of like, I don't want my data shown on the screen. I was like, oh my God, what do I do? Fortunately, I had a practice leader with me, and we recovered out of that, but it was a real learning for me. I will never go into a team meeting without at least having some idea who I'm working with with this group. So it's a good, especially as a performance advisor, know who you're working with. It's important that people don't feel like I was put through this process and it's punitive. You want it to be a very positive experience.
And what he did with Keith was basically what we're talking about with the team member review. It doesn't have to be like this scary, intense thing. It's what you did today was what we're talking about.
Yeah, it was very, very professionally done. And
I think it's just to sort of play into that, it's important to identify if there's a trust issue somewhere in the team. Let's get that out in private, because otherwise someone will use the report to say what they want to say in the meeting, whereas if you can get them comfortable with the report, uncover the trust issue, and then figure out how it's going to be dealt with in the team, that's better. And if the team is actually in an unhealthier state than the leader believes it is, then maybe you don't do the team meeting, and you've got to do more leadership development with the team leader, or make changes. But you don't want to make the trust levels worse by just walking in there and barging in and running the session. So I think it is very important that everybody is profiled and met with first, and then you can at least deal with what needs to be dealt with. And it may be a trust issue, and it's worth talking about with the whole team there, and the leader may have to eat some humble pie.
I'd like to do just a 15-minute, with the permission of the client, 15-minute debrief with each of the players before so I can build a rapport and also see if they had any issue, just how, if they feel this is a joke or serious or not, just to really get a sense of, to get a sense of how much buy-in I'm going to have or where my pushback is going to come from, so I can be prepared. You know, as much as I I like to be on the fly, I do prepare as much as I can.
Yeah. That's a good approach. Even 15 minutes, you're going to figure out you're going to have a problem.
Team building session is a real process. It's not just stand up and deliver and, okay, here's your profiles. I mean, that can be done in a very light session if you just want to explain to people this is about human behaviour and some of us are different in the team. But there's always some risks when you do it. But really to do it properly, it's a process.
So for team performance, there's also a great, powerful question book in the Knowledge Center. It really does, with the unlocking guide, that performance plan, because it really is sort of a scripted workbook to be able to identify, and then actually running your team event. Icebreakers, core program using the process. If any of you know the book 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, it's a great book to sort of use with teams. It's a little parable book, easy to read. I encourage you to read that.
And they've got a really good workbook as well.
Yeah. And we've talked about these two pieces, meet with the leader, post, because after the session, there's obviously opportunity for you to continue to work with the team, but, how did that go? What was their expectations met? It's very important to do that.
Is that book, The 5 Dysfunctions, is it the Lencioni one that's now called the 5, I think they call it the 5 behaviors of a cohesive team, where it's the triangle from trust to...
He's got a series of books, and they all build... He's got a series of books, they all build on similar concepts, they're all written in a similar style.
The reason they're so easy is they're like parable books, but they're real give you a real understanding of where dysfunction can start, breach of trust. Oops. So the 6 pillars, I've kind of covered those pretty quickly. I think we can breeze through these pretty quickly, but just these are the steps that you'd want to implement. Using the business DNA process with the leader, understanding their self-awareness, interacting with the team. Probably you're going to see blind spots, especially when you start interviewing each of the team members. But you want to build that personal performance plan for that leader. Here's Chris Coddington, and for point of reference, if you remember, pioneering, skeptical, questioning, guarded. The struggle could be too doubting. Might be actually pretty worried about it. On the pioneering, very ambitious on the goal setting, but might be too driven, especially if you have team members that are a little bit more that cautious. Working with Chris might be a little bit, they might see him as too driven. Getting leadership buy-in, I think these are really good points to make. Generally ask these questions. I would always say allow for at least 1 hour. Don't do the drive by 15 minutes, because especially with the leader, because it's probably pretty important to build some trust with that leader. What are the goals? Yeah, make it a little bit more of a formal process, because it can be quite impactful. Yeah. Yeah. But this is where you're going to be able to get really what the leader's perceptions are, what his pain points are, I guess you could say. Identifying everybody's role on the team. If you can get an org chart, that's always helpful. We understand where sort of how it's structured. Asking number 7, are there any serious problems with the team? They may not even be aware of them. Leave open-ended questions, can be important, because they will talk. I've actually been in engagements while I've been here at DNA Behavior where the leader thought they had a problem, a performance issue with somebody that just, wasn't performing. And it turned out that the person really was just in a wrong behavioral fit, moved to another role outside of that group and is thriving. It was a very good experience. And he self-selected to leave that team. So when you can do that, you've definitely done your work, because you've really been able to help an individual understand it's not a good fit. It was more of a technical role, and he was more of a relationship type person that just didn't fit. Monique?
What is your experience in the ideal time frame for enrolling this? If it's a 2-day engagement or 1-day engagement, or as far as like the minimum to enroll it to a team, if someone was to hire you for a 2-day engagement, could you do that? Is that not realistic?
It's really difficult to do. What we typically do is you meet with the leader, sort of the scoping of it. When it's actually set, believe it or not, you go into an organization, if it's a larger team, it's going to be hard for you as a consultant to meet with each team member. So it's done more than just 2 days. It's you sort of fit it into a defined period, maybe over a week or 2 weeks potentially, and then you do the team readout 2 weeks after. It's just not.
If you had a retreat, a 2-day
If you had a
retreat,
true,
could
you could do it, but it would take a lot of energy, and you'd be fast tracking things in this. I think it's always better if you're doing a retreat for everybody to go through it as part of a pre-process, maybe have a little bit of an interaction with you, and then maybe sort of do the 2-day. I think it'd be, I don't know, Hugh, if you got some experience with that, doing a 2-day where everybody goes through it. I think anything you can do pre the 2-day.
Yeah, I would be, from an execution point of view, I would be getting the profiles done up front, some days or weeks, couple of weeks ahead of time. And depending on how many are on the team, you might need to allow 2 days of time to get that done, to visit the office and meet with everybody. A couple you might have to do on the phone. And then the team program, depending on what the issues are that need to be solved, would get done in a day. But maybe you might do it in a day and run it into 2 days if there are, some more serious issues. You definitely need in the team day half a day just to deal with the team behaviours as a group, and then half a day to deal with potentially what the issue is to be facilitated. But if there's more than that, then you might run it into 2 days. If you're doing the leadership development program for a group of leaders, then, and because there's the 2 profiles, then you'd be making that 2 days. It's a matter of how much content you want to cover in it, but you definitely need half a day to deal with the behavioural part, what all the factors mean, and get everybody reconciled to their differences, and then get to the meat of the bone with the issue. So that's going to be, a good day. And then if there's, leadership development or a major conflict resolution issue, then you might run it into 2 days. But you've got to allow a couple of days of time, if there's 10 to 15 people in the team, to interview everybody beforehand. Set that up. Right. So, you're talking at least 3 to 4 days of man time to get this executed. And so your fees have got to reflect that. Yeah. To do all that is not a $3,000 program. You're talking, $1,000 a head type thing or more.
One of the biggest challenges I've seen, and it's been repeated, is you get a team of like 12, getting that 12th person to take the process, take the assessment or the discovery. It's tough sometimes. So your role is like chasing people down to get that. So any support you can get from the leader to send that email out saying this is the process we're going to go through, and having somebody internally to help you will make a huge difference. And you probably have experience with that already. People taking it, finding the time to do it. Okay. 10, ask the leader, about each person. Really does help. You get to know the team, then you actually meet with them. It's quite interesting. You get one thing. One of our colleagues that does a lot of teamwork, she says by about the third or fourth person, because if it's a large team, you get some very common themes that are going on, and it really helps the consultant understand what's really going on, and helps develop sort of the process to make a more cohesive team. But you see some commonality in every one of those interviews.
I can't remember how long it took to take it. Was it 20-minute max, 25-minute max?
For the actual discovery, the 46 questions?
The Gallup is 45 minutes, so that's why 30 to 45.
Like 10 to 15 minutes. 15's even can be high. Depends on, sometimes some people take a little bit longer. The reflective thinkers might take a little longer, but, we really recommend. No, they do not get cut off, but we can actually time everything.
So we know the average time is not even 12 minutes that people are taking to do it, because we're measuring it inside the system, but we don't cut anybody off.
So now you raise another question for me. How does a lot of these tests being timed, they don't have time to think. It becomes very instinctive for them. They just come with a gut. So how does the overthinking and perhaps changing a question or a response impact the accuracy?
There will always be, we set it up through the instructions to take it quickly and to basically go through it fast. But we don't, how do I put it? We don't, it's not enforced in that way by the technology. So there will be the odd planned reflective thinker strategist who will take more time thinking about it and try and, shortcut it. But it doesn't happen very often. If someone's really having a go at it, like in terms of gaming, they'll come out as an adapter.
And we talked about that. Yeah. But we can actually, if you have a client, so a couple things happen. It's probably, I don't know how long it's been since you've taken it. I think it's been since we've gone mobile since you took it. But it sort of scrolls you through, so it sort of, you can't go back and re-answer something. It sort of scrolls you through to the next screen. And it's done but that way because if you have an internet connection issue, you can go right back into the session and complete the process. Or somebody gets distracted, and we always say, take in an environment where it's, they're relaxed. But if it does, sort of they go back away from it and come back, they pick right back up. Okay. And I know we are now getting very close to the end of our time. So I'm just going to cover sort of the team review, and we will pick this back up. But one of the things I definitely want to do for tomorrow, especially since we are going to pick up on team performance again, because I think this is an important part of being an advisor and doing any type of teamwork, is thinking, as we've gone through this, that you're the consultant, how do you run these engagements with your teams or individuals, because it can be pretty impactful in just think about or reflect on what we've talked about and come back with questions, because this piece of it can be a really breakthrough for companies and teams when you do these. And it's not always just about the behavior piece, but the dynamics. You can really help a team move from a storming, and I've seen it. I actually have seen teams that never move out of storming. It's quite amazing to me that they can get any results. But when you can get them to sort of move to the norming and the performing stage, you've done your job. It's really remarkable to see that. And you do that through coaching, because sometimes leaders don't even understand, or team members, how their role fits into this. So it can be like the pieces of a puzzle coming together. All right. So we've covered this a little bit, but I think I want to sort of end the day just, is there any questions that you have? We're going to go to dinner. We're going to sort of probably have a little discussion around behavior, those of it that are going to go. But any questions that people have for either Hugh or for me? Is your energy low? Yeah, for our engager friends, and I'm sure it is. No, this has been a long day, and we always find that when you talk about this, it can be draining. So I encourage you, after you have dinner, maybe not to think about it too much. I think we did send out communication DNA to a couple folks. Yeah, Bridget did. So I think for Paul, if you have it in your inbox, completed, it's just quick 12 questions. You're probably curious about your communication style, because tomorrow afternoon we will run through that. By the time we get to communication DNA tomorrow, you'll probably be teaching this.
And I think wrapping up on that one reason why the day is tiring, and often the first day is more tiring than the second day, is because you're processing, it's not just a lot of information, it's a lot of information about you and your own human emotions, and that's actually quite hard work, to process that and deal with that. So when you do these team events, also remember that's what's going to be going on as well. So it's going to be quite hard work, you know, for these people when they do it.
So we talked yesterday quite a bit about the workplace operations report. We haven't spent a lot of time on the coaching report, and that may be one that we do the webinar on, is the coaching report, because it's got a lot of great information, but it might be pretty heavy for sort of getting to a deep dive today. But asking the question, we're working on team performance here. Do you have the right people on the team? Are their true strengths being utilized on the team? And are they focused on sort of the right things for client service? And then sort of we talked a lot about the blockages. You know, you can have blockages that really do impede high performance. And you can use these tools to be able to help really break through some of this. And one of the things I love about the team report, it's not biased at all. Sort of the information's there, and then you as the facilitator or the leader can really help the client work through some of these sort of challenges that could be opportunities. But we really focus a lot on these environment keys, the strengths, the struggles, environment keys. Really great to use with every individual on the team, and then, you know, even if you do a team building event, using these sort of on a wall chart. I think we talked about that yesterday. Can be quite effective, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. Use of team reports in those powerful questions we always talk about. And there's a great performance plan I think that we're sending as part of that with team. You know, just the awareness, the communication, and one thing here, this point here, grounded in honest appraisal feedback. It's tough for people to sometimes provide feedback, so the more stability types and the more people sort of at that bottom of the 10 may not be comfortable, maybe they have not had an opportunity to really get their voice heard, so you as the consultant can help them sort of get that voice, but find out what's really going on. Building trust, you know, we talked a lot about that yesterday. The trust, you can't manufacture trust. It's really something that has to happen. The more skeptical profiles to the more trusting profiles, you know, you have to balance that. Remember, the skeptical people really need to learn by asking questions. That's how they sort of process things. They want to be able to know that everything's sort of tight and that everything's moving along. So you can really help build team trust, you as the facilitator, and then use the program. It's well laid out, good steps to do team performance. And this one we do in most of our webinars, the productivity gains, and people would say, you know, this comes from a 2009 Gallup poll or research, 70%. I've actually worked on teams that have a 70% uplift. I've actually worked on teams where that's probably negative on team performance, because there's a lot of storming going on with teams. If people are really in the right seats, in the right place, there's good communication, you're building trust, and it really does build all of these, and you can have a very high performing team. And I'm pretty convinced if there's a lot of dysfunction going on with the team, if you have the leadership's sort of championing that they want to break through this, you could really have some effective sort of results. May mean some team members need to be displaced, and I mean that in sort of coached out, or they need to actually self-select out because they just are the wrong player for the team. And that does happen. You know, if you do it in a way that's respectful, you can, you know, people know if people leave a team that there's action happening, that, you know, and people need to feel somewhat safe, but they need to be doing the work to get to that productivity gains. Any questions on that? Because I think that's an important stat. Monique?
Good morning. First question. Do you have a tool that you implement at the beginning to measure where the engagement is, and then coming back after you've been 6 months having worked through it to measure progress?
So, Monique, a simple tool is inside that workbook with 20 questions that addresses all of those areas. And everybody in the team can go anonymously and rate 1 to 5 how they think the company is going in these areas. And then you add it all up and it gives you a score. And that then becomes the focal point of the conversation. Say, well, okay, our customers don't think we're very good. So what's going on there? Are we, not doing the services on time? Or the suppliers, in fact, think we're not so good, so that there's issues in there. So that's a really simple one. We actually have, which we'll show you later, we have more of a much bigger online tool, which you actually could send out to other executives, customers, suppliers, all the stakeholders to evaluate the company 1 to 7 in that, and then you tot up all the scores, and you'll get back a pretty in-depth report. So we call that a business engagement 360. That's for the overall business, but we've sort of got like the mini one there in that booklet that could be used with teams. And you could take it out of there and redesign it into the way you want to have it. I think it's a good idea because it will help with identifying where the problem is and what everybody thinks the problem is.
Mm-hmm. Great question. Any other questions about this productivity gains?
I think the other point that Leon was making, but I'll reinforce, is very often in a team, if you take a team of 10, there will be one square peg in the round hole there, and as Leon said, that doesn't mean the person has to leave the company. They could just be, I think someone was mentioned it yesterday, they could be put into another role. They could be in customer service, but they should be in training or whatever it is, or they should be, they're in sales and they could be in training. But that one person not being happy and somewhat being a cancer and a drag on the team will be even though everybody's not completely aware of the problem up front, after a few months or 6 months, that cancer becomes a really big energy drain. And the higher up in the food chain that person is, the worse it is. So getting it dealt with in a nice way earlier and confronting the problem is better than it dissipating out and everybody talking about it at the in the tea room and at lunch. So
yeah. And we probably all worked on teams like that, where maybe the leader isn't aware of it, but it is there.
And everybody just pulse checking for the energy flows, and then when someone leaves, usually no one's surprised, actually. So it's about how do you handle that in a graceful way that does itself, the exit doesn't destroy the team because of the way it happens, because no one wants to think they're going to be pushed out that way either. So if you can do it with care and love, then I think it's a good thing. Easier said than done. But my view is, when we showed the slide yesterday of the understanding, acceptance, and respect, and if you get to a point where because we can put it back up if that's what you're asking. But when you get to the point that respect is lost, you've got a 3 to 6 month window where something will have to be done. And the respect gets lost because there hasn't been the understanding and acceptance of the differences. And so that's sort of my view of that. Once you get respect is lost somewhere, then there's the real dissipation. And it's better to be proactive before it really becomes a problem. And that's, and then if people are going to do something naughty, it will happen in the months after the respect is lost.
Any other questions? Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay, great. So we talked yesterday about the 5 dysfunctions of a team, the Patrick Lencioni book. I would recommend, if you're not familiar with it, it's a great read. This is really where you have that absence of trust, fear of conflict, lack of commitment, avoidance of accountability, and attention to results. All of it leads to truly dysfunction. And I've seen teams that have done that, and I'm sure all of us can relate to that when we've worked in groups. I'm a big believer of creative conflict, but if it's always in conflict, that's probably that storming phase that we talked about. But commitment to the goals, you really want to make sure there's a commitment to the goals. You don't want people just saying yes, and then they go back into the water cooler area and say, that's crazy. You got to really sort of address that pretty quickly and empower your other team members that are on that to speak up. They have a voice. Nobody is held hostage to the job. Hold people accountable. It's very important. and key focus, definitely on the keen focus on the team results. And I will say, I noticed there was a couple people that mentioned they have team calls. I think, Michelle, you do, because you've got to have a distant group. And I would say one thing that can really breach trust is when you have sort of a situation with the whole team, and somebody's called out on the call. It makes it unsafe. It makes it very difficult for people to want to bring up an issue. So I think those things need to be handled one-on-one when somebody's sort of out of touch with something, because that's where that coaching can be very important for the individual. But calling people out on a call can probably be disastrous, especially when you have a remote team.
I think if you're calling them out and you're embarrassing them, making them small, that's the problem. If we're at that stage, that's a one-on-one. But to say to someone, which is the fear of conflict part there, in the second one, that I don't agree with your opinion on that, and here's why, you've got to be able to have those conversations. That's healthy conversation.
Creative conflict instead of fear.
So here's one of my favourite parts with this diagram and the flow there. Does anyone see any correlation to the business DNA profile reports there and the scores?
What do you mean?
Well, look at absence of trust, fear of conflict. So why might there be an absence of trust? It's caused by the people in the business. Which people in the business naturally do not trust others? Yeah, so the top people or the top what? The top styles? The skeptical people. So in our this is why in our profile reports that fifth factor that we brought in there is trust. Okay, so you've got the trust factor. You've got people who are naturally high on trust. They'll be okay when you're at this level of the pyramid, at being more open, prepared to be more vulnerable, trust others to do the work, etc., etc. Right? Skeptics, who are the initiators, the influencers, or some of the influencers, certainly the strategists, like me, have the absence of trust. The problem is, not as open in the conversation, a bit more guarded. We'll ask those hard nut questions the wrong way, all that sort of stuff, right? More protective of our own patch. All those types of things come from the skeptic type person. Now, skeptical also, remember, is a strength if you learn to use it properly in being discerning and asking the right questions and protecting information. So, I'm not wanting to say that being skeptical is all bad. It's just got to be deployed the right way. But for teams, it can get in the way really quickly. But then it flips when you get to here, because there are the people who trust are the more patient people, typically speaking, and they don't like conflict as much. They're not as good in the conflict conversation. If they get directly challenged by another team member and they're a little bit more passive, there's likely to be a shutdown. So there's some behavioural navigation to get that right. So the skeptics have to learn to trust a bit, and the people who are a bit more patient, in fact the trusting ones, have to learn to toughen up. And that's a very fine balance that you have to get right, because none of that, if you don't get those two right, that one ain't going to work. And when you read the book, you'll really see the order to this is very, very important. So you have to have the trust first. And then you can deal with the conflict issue and having people confront each other. And like in our office, for example, Ryan, who's on our team, the CTO, he's had to learn to confront me and other initiators on the team. He's a reflective thinker, and he's in a very key role in our business with the technology. And so he's been coached on that. And in fact, we've done outside training courses ourselves, even though we're the behavioural firm, where we've had external facilitators, external to our tools, come in and just deal with trust, conflict, and how to navigate conflict, and be more mature in that. So that's a big one. And if you want to know the name of that facilitator, I can always let you know as well, because in a way it's a specialised service. And we did it not because we had any problems. It was more because I believed in doing that for team building and for our own health, right? And even ourselves, even though we're more behaviourally aware, we still need help. We've got blind spots, right? So anyway, I just want to make that point about that this is very behaviourally linked. Lencioni in the book doesn't make it out quite that way, but we're a behavioural, he's more bringing it as a process, and I 100% agree with him. But if you connect it to behaviour and understand it from a behavioural lens, then you can actually solve those problems. And that's why this becomes a great framework. And that can be, for you guys trying to sell services or bring in processes to businesses, this can be a whole session in itself. You know, you can do the initial one-day team building session, get everybody behaviourally aware. That's like a really good one-day program. And this can become another one.
I have a question on your the fear of conflict and your people stepping out. Your fear of conflict. The concept of the fear. People that might be able to step out and have those conversations, you're asking them to stretch themselves a little bit to be able to speak up. Would those be in the risk taker, the bolder people, or where? I'm trying to find that description of those people who would feel comfortable having difficult conversations. There are people who naturally can have that. Where are they on your?
So the fast-paced people
Okay.
will be more confronting. The risk
It
takers
would be
will.
called the confronting.
Yep.
And okay.
The
that's what I was
creative
looking
people
for,
will be happy sharing an idea, generally. But again, if you get creative people who are relational or patient, and you get creative people who are fast-paced. So the creative person could have the ideas, but if they're patient and they're in a room with someone who's fast-paced, they will shut down. They'll bring it up and say, I've got this thought. And then someone, boom, comes in who's much more analytical and, well, why does that work? And bang, bang, bang. That'll shut them off, right? Does that make sense? So that at the end of the day, the creative people will talk, will communicate and be stronger with it because they want to get their idea across, particularly if they're outgoing. The risk taker will take the chance on it, but even then, you know, they might do it more secretly. You know, there's possible that they'll, if they're reserved. So I really keep this one at the end of the day, whether it's really the conflict's going to get addressed. It's going to come down to where the person sits on the patience factor.
On the confronting or not.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so you really, for this one to work, the people who are more confronting like me need to move to the middle, and the people who are more patient need to move to the middle the other way. That's the emotional intelligence learning. For that one to work. But all the other factors might help, whether someone will bring out the idea. Because if you are a very anchored person, and quite patient, and you're quite passive person working on processes and procedures, you probably can see all the problems that are going on in the business because the processes aren't working and things aren't happening the way they should, and it's getting messy. But if you're patient, you're just going to sit there and cooperate and not really want to bring it out. Right? So really the one to focus on is the patience factor. Now normally the people who are higher on patient are also cooperative. They're not as take charge. Those two usually travel together pretty closely. So in that first factor. So the first and the third factors are really key to this one.
Great. Any other questions on that? Good dialogue. So reviewing the team report, and I am going to put up our team report as soon as we get through this section because I think it's important for us to do because it's about the ideal size of a team, and we'll sort of dissect it a bit. This point too is probably really important. We don't really have a common goal other than learning this today, but when you do have a team, when you go into them, sort of make sure that you know the team's purpose, their business goals. It's not just really sort of a warm and fuzzy sort of event unless that's really what the purpose is just awareness. You really want to know who the leader of the team is, and you've probably engaged with that person to start with, identifying sort of what's important for them. And then if you know the team roles of everyone, you can start seeing some patterns when you see these reports. So it's important to do some upfront work before you go in and do a team review. See if there's any, in your initial review, identify if there are any talent gaps. That can be pretty important. And if there are any blockages, you know, that's through the interview process. And then identify the team's stability. Is it stable? You know, and you'll do that through interviewing. Great sort of methodology, page 142, I'd say that's a real key slide. And then the team report, which I did show up on the screen, but I didn't go, I kind of covered it at a surface level. You'll see here when I pull up our team report that we'll have the 8 sort of factors and then sort of where everybody is in the team, so their distribution and their number. It's quite interesting to see this. As soon as you run a team report, you can almost identify where there's some potential blockages, even if you haven't interviewed the team. It's quite interesting to see that. And we will go through that around identifying when you're hiring for your next person. You know, we have groups that actually run team reports. I don't know if you guys do this, Tyler, at the store level, but where there's a potential block, where there's a gap. You know, maybe it's customer care or maybe it's on the technical side. When you're hiring your next person, what do you need for that person to be in that, have that behavioral fit? And then really sort of enhancing.
Do you
sort
guys
of the
have a
discussion.
team? Do you guys do a team report for every office?
We don't know, sir.
So it might be, or branch, retail store, might be an interesting idea for you to do that as part of your learning with this. And even if we give you a coaching session, on the phone, to run out a team report for every store, and then one for all the district, and then one for all the branch managers, and then the leadership down, and just do that as a complete organisational exercise. That would be quite a powerful exercise for you to do, and give you a lot of insight for the business. And so, if you really want to grow and develop into being the business leader in there, that would be, you've got the inside track to do that.
Awesome.
Yeah. And you guys have all the tools there. Jamie would.
And you would be bringing value to, I think, to your 3,
Sure.
top level leaders if you did it and showed them.
Cool. Yeah, I'm going to take some notes. I spoke with Kevin yesterday, so we're going to
Yeah.
have a meeting, him
Yeah.
and Steve, when I get back
Oh, great.
next week. Yeah, on Monday. So.
Well, again, to reinforce the point, this will, for you being a more junior leader, an emerging leader in the business, and younger than them, this gives you this is objective insight. The answers are going to be right there on the page, and they can see it. And they will know that against the performance metrics. And so that's the power of you doing it. And if you just spend the time and be very methodical doing it, that would be a great organisational review. And this, I think, would 100% cement
I agree.
everything you've learned out of this.